eyes know where it went and that it will return in its appointed hour. It raged across the heavens in the days of wrath, and this was its likeness. It was as a billowing cloud of smoke, enwrapped in a ruddy glow, not distinguishable in joint or limb. Its mouth was an abyss from which came flame, smoke, and hot cinders. Welcome, friends. I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Secrets Revealed here on Truth Frequency Radio. And as always, I'm honored to be here with you and to have your attention for the next couple of hours as we go through all things esoteric. And this evening specifically, I wanted to cover the story of the destroyer. And when I allude to the destroyer, I'm speaking about what seems to be an object that every once in a while, whenever the Most High is to pour the wrath of God out on the earth and to bring forth judgment upon the cultures and the civilizations that are in that time inhabiting the earth, that he utilizes this object, which is in the Colburn Bible, alluded to as the destroyer. It's also spoken about in other places with other names. It's also called the Sky Monster. It's referenced as the blue or the red star Kachina in the Hopi prophecy of the last times. It is also called in Revelation chapter 9, I believe, wormwood. And it's described as a mountain of fire, which during the Great Tribulation will be cast down into the sea. And it causes widespread destruction and is said to lead the earth to go through turmoil and the creatures of the seas to die in mass number, and a third of the ships also to be destroyed, that the rivers and the oceans and the waters, which disappearing completely, fresh water no longer to be found on the earth, that those that are here must dig wells to seek something to drink, and that there is a dust associated with the presence of this object, that a red dust specifically, that causes the rains to be discolored, and the people to, when they drink this water, that it will be like blood. And that's in appearance, not so much so in taste or flavor or anything like that, but And so, according to the scrolls, which I'm going to share some of those with you this evening, and I'm also going to share a few other prophecies. Um, but okay, I just have to highlight it and make it larger because the text that I'm reading from is very small. And so I want to be able to blow it up in size so that I can read it easier. It seems like my eyes are getting older. I'm almost 50 now. And so, and also because I read too much from the computer, I think. All right. Okay. And so I have increased the size and the font of the text that I will share from with you. And as I said, this will be portions of it, segments will be from the Colburn Bible. And for those that have never read the Colburn Bible, it's very interesting text. And it's said to have been preserved by the Saxons, which are the sons of Isaac in some manner. And it is a parallel Bible to that which we are most familiar with regard to the King James and the five books of Moshe, and that there are in this parallel account description and great elaboration on things that are ambiguous, to say the least, with regard to certain teachings and certain concepts. And without a doubt, when you study the Bible, you find the teachings, like, for instance, on the pre Adamites and the First World Age and the destruction of Atlantis and these kind of things, the gap theory, those kind of things. You find them actually elaborated upon in greater detail within the Colburn Bible. And this is a text that had been preserved in the Glastonbury Abbey for thousands of years. And it goes back, as I said, to the very ancient antediluvian pre-Adamic age and covers a wide scale and timeline for the creation narrative. And even there's an account within it called the destruction and recreation of the earth, which is absolutely fascinating. And so I will probably share that with you as well. Because in that portion of the text, it mentions the return of the destroyer as well and how it had part to play in the judgment that was at that time levied upon the fallen angels. And that is actually part of the book of creation. And so let me pull it up as well. And another thing that is really beautiful about this manuscript is that it is deeply poetic and very well written. And it's beautifully crafted. And so we'll start with that portion on the creation and the recreation. Let me, again, I have to just increase the size and then I will begin the actual reading. But I do appreciate everybody being patient with me. I wish I would have had just a little bit more time to prepare this show, but I've been dedicated and focused working on this new book. And I'm going through one of the proofreads now, and I'm about 2/3 of the way through in story. And I have just a couple of more chapters that I'd like to add. And so I do feel pretty confident that I should have the book in at least um, a rendition that I would feel comfortable releasing to the community at that time. And of course, I do feel like I will add to possibly because there is only 1 month remaining. And so there is a chance I will add more material, but it will be enough and it will contain the majority of the story in the manner that I'd want to tell it, and that it would be completed in such way that I would feel comfortable in releasing it to the public, or at least that is my hope. And so, God willing, God, hopefully, I'll be able to get it to that particular point. But I do plan on speaking about and sharing this information at the conference. And because it is without a doubt tied into the end times. And so let me just say hello to everybody. And again, thank you for taking the time to join us. And we will now, I'll begin with the destruction and the recreation, and then we'll move forward in talking about the specifics of the destroyer and how it is prophetically revealed within the Qumran manuscripts and other places that it is related to the last day, the great and terrible day of the Lord, the judgment of the wrath of God poured out on the wicked and those not written into the books of life. I should probably be able to get through this before the end of the first segment, so let's try. The destruction and the recreation, it says this. It is known, and the story comes down from ancient times, that there was not one creation, but two. a creation and a recreation. It is a fact known to the wise that the earth was utterly destroyed once and then reborn on a second wheel of creation. At the time of the great destruction of earth, God caused a dragon from out of heaven to come and encompass her about. The dragon was frightful to behold. It lashed its tail. It breathed out fire and hot coals, and a great catastrophe was inflicted upon mankind. The body of the dragon was wreathed in a cold, bright light. Beneath, on the belly, was a ruddy hued glow, while behind it trailed a flowing tail of smoke. It spewed out cinders and hot stones, and its breath was foul and stenchful, poisoning the nostrils of men. Its passage caused great thunderings and lightnings to rend the thick darkened sky, all heaven and earth being made hot. The seas were loosed from their cradles and rose up, pouring across the land. There was an awful shrilling, trumpeting, which outpowered even the howling of the unleashed winds. Men, stricken with terror, went mad at the awful sight in the heavens. They were loosed from their senses and dashed about, crazed, not knowing what they did. The breath was sucked from their bodies and they were burnt with a strange ash. And then it passed, leaving the earth enwrapped within a dark and glowing mantle, which was ruddily lit up inside. The bowels of the earth were torn open in great writhing upheavals, and a howling whirlwind rent the mountains apart. The wrath of the sky monster was loosed in the heavens. It lashed about in flaming fury, roaring like a thousand thunders. It poured down fiery destruction amid a welter of thick black blood. So awesome was the fearfully aspected thing that the memory mercifully departed from men. His thoughts were smothered under a cloud of forgetfulness. The earth vomited forth great gusts of foul breath from awful mouths opening up in the midst of the land. The evil breath bit at the throat before it drove men mad and killed them. Those who did not die in this manner were smothered under a cloud of red dust and ashes, or were swallowed by the yawning mouths of earth, or crushed beneath large crashing rocks. The first sky monster was joined by another, which swallowed the tail of the one going before. But the two could not be seen at once. The sky monster reigned and raged above earth, doing battle to possess it. But the many bladed sword of God cut them in pieces, and their falling bodies enlarged the land and the sea. In this manner, the first earth was destroyed by calamity, descending from out of the skies. The wrath of the vaults of heaven had opened to bring forth monsters more fearsome than any that had ever haunted the uneasy dreams of men. Men and their dwelling places were gone. Only sky boulders and red earth remained where once they were, but amidst all the desolation, a few survived, for man is not easily destroyed. They kept out from the caves and came down from the mountainsides. Their eyes were wild and their limbs trembled. Their bodies shook and their tongues lacked control. Their faces twisted, the skin hung loose on their bones. They were as maddened wild beasts driven into an enclosure before flames. They knew no law, being deprived of all the wisdom they once had, and those who had guided them were gone. The earth, the only true altar of God, had offered up a sacrifice of life and sorrow to stone, to atone for the sins of mankind. Man had not sinned indeed, but in the things he had failed to do, man suffers not only for what he does, but for what he fails to do. He is not chastised for making mistakes, but for failing to recognize and rectify them. Then the great canopy of dust and cloud, which encompassed the earth, enshrouding it in heavy darkness, was pierced by ruddy light, and the canopy swept down in great cloudbursts and raging storm waters. Cool moon tears were shed for the distress of the earth and the woes of men. When the light of the sun pierced the earth's shroud, bathing the land in revitalizing glory, the earth again knew night and day, for there were now times of light and darkness. The smothering canopy rolled away, and the vaults of heaven became visible to man. The foul air purified, new air clothed the reborn earth, shielding her from the dark, hostile void of heaven. The rainstorms ceased to beat upon the faces of the land, and the waters stilled their turmoil. Earthquakes no longer tore the earth open, nor was it burned and buried by hot rocks. The land masses were reestablished in stability and solidity, standing firm in the midst of the surrounding waters. The oceans fell back to their assigned places, and the land stood steady upon its foundations. All right, we'll be right back. We were almost through with this segment, but I'll finish it up when we return.
Sacred Word Revealed comes to Atlanta, Georgia on March 27th through 29th, 2020. Purposed to reveal end times mysteries, to prepare the final generation, we must don the full armor of God. Featuring Zen Garcia, Gary Wayne, Stephen and Yana Ben Noon, Dr. Stephen Pidgeon, Justin James Garcia, Dr. Joy Pugh, Rob Skiba, Laurel Austin, buy your tickets now at sacredwordrevealed.com.
Hello friends, thank you for joining us this evening.
I'm your host, Zen Garcia. All right, welcome back, everybody. I'm gonna finish this reading. It's telling you in this segment just about how the Earth kind of resettled and took on normality once more. And I'm almost done with this particular section, but you can see that with the coming of the destroyer, that not only did were there up earthquakes and upheavals, but all kind of cataclysmic events occurred, floods, tsunamis, things of that nature. And you can also tell as well that this is describing that this text contains encoded within it the biblical cosmology as well. The describes the land elevated above the sea level, and then that the oceans of the world circle and encompass all the dry land. And that's exactly the way that it's also described in the Ever New Tongue, which is a manuscript that I released in Paradise, Sides of the North, and the Mouth of the Congregation. And it goes into great detail into the specifics of the cosmology, how the Earth was created as a circle inscribed upon a square, and um, a compass upon the waters of the deep, and that the dry land elevated above the sea level. Then you have the creatures and all the land-based animals and all those being made for living within the different elements. And then you have on the fourth day that the luminaries are given circle within the tabernacle or the firmament. And so these kind of things, the windows of heaven, the vaults of heaven, these kind of things are mentioned within this account as well. But let me complete it so we can move on into the other components that I'd like to share with you this evening as well. Again, we are, for those that are just now joining us, we are covering the destruction and recreation of the earth in what is Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, where the earth in the Hebrew is Haya wa Tohu wa Bohu. Haya Tohu wa Bohu, meaning that the primeval earth became or becomes a deserted wasteland and an indistinguishable ruin. And, the wasteland becoming a wasteland and a indistinguishable ruin, those concepts imply that something had happened that led to it taking on a destroyed appearance. And that's in fact what did occur. And so, continuing, the waters were purified, the sediment sank, and life increased in abundance. Life was renewed, but it was different. Man survived, but he was not the same. The sun was not as it had been, and the moon had been taken away. Man stood in the midst of renewal and regeneration. He looked up into the heavens above in fear for the awful powers of destruction lurking there. And henceforth, The placid skies would hold a terrifying secret. Man found the new earth firm and the heavens fixed. He rejoiced, but also feared, for he lived in dread that the heavens would again bring forth monsters and crash about him. When men came forth from their hiding places and refugees, the world their fathers had known was gone forever. The face of the land was changed, and earth was littered with rocks and stones, which had fallen when the structure of heaven collapsed. One generation groped in the desolation and gloom, and as the thick darkness was dispelled, its children believed they were witnessing a new creation. Times passed, memory dimmed, and the records of events was no longer clear. Generation followed generation, and as the ages unfolded, new tongues and new tales replaced the old. All right, so that was from the first book, the book of creation, which is in chapter 1. And it would make sense that, these things, these components, these events are linked to that destruction, to what initially was described and revealed as the destruction of the First World Age. And it's interesting to me that so few really understand how this concept plays into the biblical account and how it hides a whole portion of ancient history of antediluvian times, which if you do not understand this concept in fullness, it is very difficult to make sense of all of what led to where we are now. And so, something to consider and something to examine further, because as I said, here we have in the Colburn manuscript great elaboration, a revelation of what occurred in those ancient times as connected to what Peter calls the world that then was. And it was this world which was destroyed initially that led to what we see in Genesis chapter 1, 3 onward of the earth having to be restored from the destruction of what ended up being the war in heaven. All right, and so the next portion that I'm going to read from is a prophecy on the return of the destroyer. And it is found, it's chapter 3 of the Great Scroll, which is one of the last divisions of the Celtic Bronze Book that one can find and read for yourself. You know, some of those events. I opened the show with a few lines from the prophecy, just so you know, because you'll hear that again. And I think it's this is a very intriguing prophecy. And it's a reminder to us as future generations as to what had occurred in our ancient past. And that we should be aware because prophetically, this again is revealed even in the Bible, in Revelation. The last days, the end of time, the pre wrath, that this object is said to make another appearance and that it will influence again in judgment what occurs here upon the earth as well as um, a future which where the wrath of God is poured out on the wicked. And so I'll read this portion and then afterwards, before the break, if you have any questions, list them in the chat on the break. Make sure you highlight my name because the scroll, especially for those that are watching the YouTube live stream, is quick, and so unless you highlight it and it emphasizes um, a response to me in orange, we'll probably miss it. So men forget the days of the destroyer. Only the wise know where it went and that it will return in its appointed hour. It raged across the heavens in the days of wrath, and this was its lightness. It was as a billowing cloud of smoke enwrapped in a ruddy glow, not distinguishable in joint or limb. Its mouth was an abyss from which came flame, smoke, and hot cinders. When ages pass, certain laws operate upon the stars in the heavens. Their ways change. There is movement and restlessness, but they are no longer constant, and a great light appears redly in the skies. When blood drops upon the earth, the destroyer will appear, and mountains will open up and belch forth fire and ashes. Trees will be destroyed and all living things engulfed. Waters will be swallowed up by the land, and the seas will boil. The heavens will burn brightly and redly, and there will be a copper hue over the face of the land, followed by a day of darkness. A new moon will appear and break up and fall. The people will scatter in madness. They will hear the trumpet and battle cry of the destroyer and will seek refuge in the den of the earth. This particular verse here, they will seek refuge in the den of the earth. It reminds me of that Revelation. I believe it's Revelation 6, where it speaks about how the elites being in the deep underground bases that they call for God to send the rocks upon them so they can hide from the returning face of the Lamb. And so they will hear the trumpet and battle cry of the destroyer and will seek refuge in the den in the earth. Terror will eat away their hearts, and their courage will flow from them like water from a broken pitcher. They will be eaten up in the flames of wrath and consumed by the breath of the destroyer. Thus, in the days of heavenly wrath which have gone, and thus will it be in the days of doom when it comes again. The times of its coming and going are known unto the wise. These are the signs and times which shall precede the destroyer's return. 110 generations shall pass into the west, and nations will rise and fall. Men will fly in the air as birds and swim in the seas as the fishes. Men will talk peace one with another, but hypocrisy and deceit shall have their day. Women will be as men, and men as women. Passion will be a plaything of a man. A nation of soothsayers shall rise and fall, and their tongue shall be the speech learned. A nation of lawgivers shall rule the earth and pass away into nothingness. One worship will pass into the four quarters of the earth, talking peace but bringing war. A nation of the seas will be greater than any other, but will be as an apple rotten at the core and will not endure. A nation of traitors will destroy men with wonders, and it shall have its day. Then shall the high strive with the low, the north with south, the east with the west, and light with darkness. Men shall be divided by their races, and the children will be born as strangers among them. Brother shall strive with brother, and husband with wife. Fathers will no longer instruct their sons, and their sons will be wayward. Women will become the common property of men and will no longer be held in regard and respect. Then men will be ill at ease in their hearts. They will seek they know not what, and uncertainty and doubt will trouble them. They will possess great riches, but be poor in spirit. Then will the heavens tremble and the earth move. Men will quake in their fear, and while terror walks with them, the heralds of doom will appear. They will come softly as thieves to the tombs. Men will know now them for what they are. And then men will be deceived. The hour of the destroyer is at hand. In those days, men will have the great book before them, and wisdom will be revealed, but the few will be gathered for the stand. It is the hour of trial. The dauntless ones will survive. The stout hearted will not go down to destruction. Great God of all ages, a light to all who set up the trials of man, be merciful to our children in the days of doom. Man must suffer to be great, but hasten not his progress unduly. In the great winnowing, be not too harsh on the lesser ones among men, Lord, even the sons. Even the son of a thief has become your scribe. This chapter 3 of the Great Skull, that speaks on the return of the destroyer, that whole chapter, that whole verse was prophetic to the description of how it truly would eventually unfold, but that they had written for the sentinels of their day to be vigilant and to keep eye on what would be the return of the destroyer in future ages. And this indeed is exactly what happened. And it is also speculated that things like, the events of Krakatoa and other areas, that even when we had severe judgment, like during the tsunami of, I think it was Christmas 2006, maybe later, but well, you'll see that when we read these other portions that, again, it connects with what happened in the past and what is said to happen in the future. My friend Doug Elwell, he wrote a book called Planet X, The Return. I forget the exact name of it. I'll look it up over break. I'll be right back for second hour.
Sacred Word Revealed comes to Atlanta, Georgia on March 27th through 29th, 2020. Purposed to reveal end times mysteries, to prepare the final generation, we must don the full armor of God. Featuring Zen Garcia, Gary Wayne, Stephen and Yana Ben Noon, Dr. Stephen Pidgeon, Justin James Garcia, Dr. Joy Pugh, Rob Skiba, Laurel Austin, buy your tickets now at sacredwordrevealed.com.
Every day, questions arise.
Are the stories in the Bible true?
What if I told you that there are hundreds of confirming witnesses,
which give intricate detail to the stories in the Bible?
Have you ever found yourself deep in the rabbit hole with questions that no one seemed to have the answers to? Join us every other Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time for our Ask Me Anything series with author and researcher Zen Garcia, as he sheds light on the mysteries which have us all searching together.
Hello friends, thank you for joining us this evening. I'm your host, Zen Garcia.
I'm your host, Zen Garcia. This is Secrets Revealed here on Truth Frequency Radio. And the book that I had mentioned previous to going to break was one written by my friend Doug Elwell. It is called Planet X, The Sign of the Son of Man and the End of the Age. And in this particular book, he makes mention of and does share, as I did in great detail with my earlier work. He shares and speculates that this particular destroyer, whereas it's said to have, well, we know now that we do not live in a solar system where the Earth is one of 9 planets revolving in orbit around the sun. But back even back in the time that he released this book, which when was it first released here? Um, doesn't mention the year here, but anyways, um, I, I believe he released it in the time that I wrote Sons of God, which was in 2011, I believe it was. But anyways, he speculates that this particular object, and he of course he's basing it on a heliocentric uh, understanding for the universe and the patterns and the supposed orbit of this particular object, which a lot of people, according to the Sumerian mythos and mythology, that this object is said to have a orbit where it takes 3,600 years to go to the outer extremes and then return to what's called it's referenced as the planet of the crossing, and is said to be orbiting the outer planets of the solar system, and that the nearest it will reach is coming towards and looping in at where the so-called asteroid belt is said to be located. And so this is all, in my opinion, now based on a wrong interpretation for the model of the world and how on how to understand the dynamics. And so, but still, it is interesting, and I do mention this because there seems to be, even encoded within the Colburn text, a pattern of repeat and a pattern of return that affects the earth and the humanity and the moon and um, other aspects in strangeness. And as I said, if you read and study from the Colburn, it's pretty easy reading, and it's beautiful. It's prose like. The rendering is very eloquent. And so for those that, like myself, who love poetry and, I was poet, still am. I write, even though I don't spend a lot of time doing that anymore, but certainly for years and years of my life, I spent a lot of time writing poems. and capturing the moment in that kind of metaphorical manner and sharing an introspective moment with my readers by trying to capture just the incredible, the awesome miracle aspect of the unfolding of a moment. Because really each moment is sacred and each is a blessing and each is unique in its miracle unfolding. And so sharing that and the travels, because I lived in a van for 4 years and traveled all over the country and visited different national and state parks. And so the first three books that I write were poetry books, which shared and captured what it was like to do that, to break free of the whole 9 to 5 and to live in freedom without having somewhere I needed to be or a timeline or a schedule or a phone or anything. Just being disconnected completely from the regular routine of life. It was very awesome experience for me and something that I recommend that everybody do if you have opportunity at some point in your life. And so, but anyways, let me go ahead and return back to chapter 4 of the Great Scroll. Oh, let me check first to see if there's any. Hello, Link and Rio and Lucky. I appreciate y'all, and let me check the live stream here just to make sure I didn't miss a question if somebody's asking something about. Give me just a minute to check the scroll. There's a mention here of how men will be like women and vice versa. And D. Smith mentions how that is for sure the times that we're living in, with the whole transgender um, and how all that is unfolding in this time, in this day and age. And certainly that seems to be something that is occurring. And evil would, the whole thing of evil would be good and good would be evil and everything would be turned upside down. Okay, EFT Upworld asks, have you heard of the SpaceX Dragon? It is a space capsule. He is the ruler of darkness of this world, and his tail lands back on the Earth after going to space, outer darkness. Um, no, I've not heard of the SpaceX Dragon. But I'm assuming it's that rocket that goes up and that they show landing um, down on the Earth. That it's able to reverse, which is kind of ridiculous to me. That everybody believes that they have control over being able to land a rocket in that manner. But just the whole concept of going into space and returning is something that is not plausible. Oh, I'd like to especially thank Miranda Fleming for your kindness, sister. We greatly appreciate you. And if you would, I would like to send you a book. So please do send me your address and if there's one that you're particularly interested in, let me know. Just as a token appreciation, I would like to do that. Just to share gratitude. And you can reach me zengarcia2010 at gmail.com. And if there is a particular title that you are interested in, again, I'd just like to thank you for your kindness and your donation. All right, let's go ahead and get back into chapter 4 on the destroyer. And I appreciate, again, all of you listening in. I hope that you are finding this information, uh, at least intriguing. All right, this again is a prophecy of the coming of the destroyer. This is chapter 4, part 2 of the Great Scroll. And it says this. Too far. This also will give you insight into some of the prophecies that will appear before the coming of the destroyer. O sentinels of the universe who watch for the destroyer, how long will your coming vigil last? O mortal men who wait without understanding, where will you hide yourselves in the dread days of doom, when the heavens shall be torn apart and the skies rent in twain, in the days when children will turn gray headed? This is specifically this thing of children turning gray headed, meaning when they are born, they already have gray hair. This is something that is found in scripture as well. And you can read it. It's a part of the prophetic account, um, that covers in great detail even what is revealed here. All right, let's continue. This is the thing which will be seen. This is the terror your eyes will behold. This is the form of destruction that will rush upon you. There will be the great body of fire, the glowing head with many mouths and eyes ever changing. Terrible teeth will be seen in formless mouths, and a fearful dark belly will glow redly from fires inside. Even the most stout-hearted man will tremble, and his bowels be loosened, for this is not a thing understandable to men. It will be a vast sky-spanning form, enwrapping the earth and burning with many hues within wide open mouths. These will descend to sweep across the face of the land, engulfing all in the yawning jaws. The greatest warriors will charge against it in vain. The fangs will fall out, and lo, they are terror inspiring things of cold, hardened water. Great boulders will be hurled down upon men, crushing them into red powder. As the great salt waters rise up in its train, and roaring torrents pour towards the land, even the heroes among mortal men will be overcome with madness. As moths fly swiftly to their doom in the burning flame, so will these men rush to their own destruction. The flames going before will devour all the works of men. The waters following will sweep away whatever remains. The dew of death will fall softly as gray carpet over the cleared land. Men will cry out in their madness, oh, whatever being there is Save us from this tall form of terror. Save us from the gray dew of death. All right, that was a short chapter, but still gives you the idea. I believe this one will give us various prophecies to watch out for as well, if I'm correct. This is chapter 5, part 3, The Destroyer, from the Scroll of Adefa. The previous two were from the Great Scroll. This was from the Scroll of Adepa. The Doom Shape, called the Destroyer, in Egypt was seen in all the lands whereabouts. In color it was bright and fiery, in appearance changing and unstable. It twisted about itself like a coil, like water bubbling into a pool from an underground supply, and all men agree it was a most fearsome sight. It was not a great comet or a loosened star, being more like a fiery body of flame. Its movements on high were slow. Below it swirled in the manner of smoke, and it remained close to the sun, whose face hid it. There was a bloody redness about it, which changed as it passed along its course. It caused death and destruction in its rising and setting. It swept the earth with gray cinder rain and caused many plagues, hunger, and other evils. It bit the skin of men and beast until they became mottled with sores. I believe this actually is the account associated to the Exodus and to the 10 plagues that had occurred therein. And what we don't find mentioned in the Bible is account of this heavenly object and of its repercussions in connection to consequentially the curses, the plagues that had come upon Egypt during that particular time. And so this again is from the this particular manuscript was preserved amongst the Egyptian priesthood as well as the Celtic peoples. And you know, I know a lot of times the Druids were said to be pagan and to be, which some were, without a doubt. But also amongst the people there were the lost tribes, the sons of Isaac, the Saxons. And so um, we even though yes, these are, you know, from a pagan perspective, and like for instance, this story is portrayed from the perspective of the Egyptian people, whereas we know in the Bible it is from the point of view of the Hebrew, the Israelites. But and so I'll continue, and just wanted to, you know, give you that context so that you could apply it to the story of the Exodus. It bit the skin of man and beast until they became mottled with sores. The earth was troubled and shook, the hills and mountains moved and rocked. The dark smoke heavens, filled heavens, bowed over earth, and a great howl came to the ears of men. Born to them upon the wings of the wind. It was the cry of the Dark Lord, the master of dread. Thick clouds of fiery smoke passed before him, and there was an awful hail of hot stones and coals of fire. The doom shape thundered sharply in the heavens and shot out bright lightnings. The channels of water were turned back unto themselves when the land tilted and great trees were tossed about and snapped like twigs. And then a voice like 10,000 trumpets was heard over the wilderness, and before its burning breath, the flames parted. The whole of the land moved, and mountains melted. The sky itself roared like 10,000 lions in agony, and bright arrows of blood sped back and forth across its face. Earth swelled up like bread upon the hearth. This was the aspect of the doom shape called the destroyer when it appeared in days long gone by, in olden times. It is thus described in the old records, few of which remain. It is said that when it appears in the heavens above, the earth splits open from its heat like a nut roasted before the fire, and then flames shoot up through the surface and leap about like fiery fiends upon black blood. The moisture inside the land is all dried up. The pastures and cultivated places are consumed in flames, and they and all trees become white ash. The doom shape is like a circling ball of flame which scatters small fiery offspring in its train. It covers about a fifth part of the sky and sends writhing, snake like fingers down to the earth. Before the sky appears frightened and it breaks up and scatters away, midday is no brighter than night. It spawns a host of terrible things. These are things said of the destroyer in the old records. Read them with a solemn heart, knowing that the doom shape has its appointed time and will return. It would be foolish to let them go unheeded. Now, men say such things are not destined for our days. May the great God above grant that this be so. But come, the day surely will, and in accordance with his nature, man will be unprepared. Chapter 6, The Dark Days. I probably should wait. I'll save this one for the next segment, and let me just check again to see if there is any questions. I do want to remind everybody that we are just a month away from the Sacred Word Revealed conference, and that we have just a few spots remaining. And, we would love to be able to meet all of you in person And certainly, if you can, please do take advantage of the many incredible speakers that are coming together for this conference. That many of them are not like, some of the others that do speak often in many of the different conferences. And so, sacredwordrevealed.com. We'll be right back for final segment.
Sacred Word Revealed comes to Atlanta, Georgia on March 27th through 29th, 2020. Purposed to reveal end times mysteries, to prepare the final generation, we must don the full armor of God. Featuring Zen Garcia, Gary Wayne, Stephen and Yana Ben Noon, Dr. Stephen Pidgeon, Justin James Garcia, Dr. Joy Pugh, Rob Skiba, Laurel Austin, buy your tickets now at sacredwordrevealed.com.
Every day, questions arise.
Are the stories in the Bible true?
What if I told you that there are hundreds of confirming witnesses?
which give intricate detail to the stories in the Bible.
Have you ever found yourself deep in the rabbit hole with questions that no one seemed to have the answers to? Join us every other Friday at 9 p.m. Eastern Time for our Ask Me Anything series with author and researcher Zen Garcia, as he sheds light on the mysteries which have us all searching together.
Hello friends, thank you for joining us this evening. I'm your host, Zen Garcia.
All right, welcome back, everybody, for final segment. This show just flew by, and it seems like the shows that I do with Rob just fly by as well. And so we are trying to bring you as much information as possible, and do join us again next week as well. Wednesday, I will be doing part 3 on the prophecy of the 10 kings and its connections to the garments of power and the rod of wonder. And then Rob will be joining me Thursday night for the 12th in our broadcast of the chapter by chapter, verse by verse reading and investigation of the book of Enoch. We did read to and reach, I believe, chapter 50. And so we are somewhere thereabouts. Um, but anyways, Ruthie asked me in the chat room as to what I am reading from. And so in the first segments of I'll just share each of the segments. I've been reading from the Colburn Bible, which is a alternate, it's a parallel Bible that was preserved by the sons of Isaac, and it was preserved in Glastonbury in Great Britain or the United Kingdom, or uh, and it was there that Longshanks, in trying to gain access to it, he burned down the abbey, and then it was snuck out by one of the priests that was able to escape that slaughter and destruction. And then in 2006, the there were certain families that were tasked with preserving and protecting and keeping this manuscript, this ancient, very ancient manuscript. They decided to release it to the world rather than it becoming destroyed and disappearing. And there were at that time only 6 copies left. And so they wanted to get it into print, into publication, and release it to the world. And that's exactly what happened. And so since that time, we have gained access to it. I read it shortly thereafter. I read it over the course of a whole summer, every day, 3-4 hours. That's how long it took me to get through the entirety of the manuscript, but it was well worth the effort. And so, in the first part, in the first segment of the show, I read from the first scroll, which is the creation, the great creation, and specifically, I believe it was chapter 3 or chapter 4 that I read, and that chapter is called "The Destruction and Recreation," which is specific to Genesis chapter 1, verse 2, where the war in heaven led to the earth becoming uh, vain, without form, and void, is what it says. But in the Hebrew, it means that the primeval earth became a deserted wasteland and an indistinguishable ruin. And so this whole chapter was describing that, and it also has connection. Um, the destroyer had a part to play in that destruction as well. And so then I read from chapter 3 and 4 over the next 2 segments, chapter 3, 4, and 5 of the Great Scroll, which is found in the very last portion of the Colburn Bible, as well as um, the scroll of Depa, which was the portion that I read from in previous segment. In this segment here, we are moving on to chapter 6, and it's called The Dark Days. And this is, again, I believe, specific to the Exodus. And this one's a little bit longer, so I need to go ahead and get started. I will check at the end in the chat room and look for the any questions that you may have. The Dark Days. The Dark Days began with the last visitation of the Destroyer, and they were foretold by strange omens in the skies. All men were silent and went about with pale faces. The leaders of the slaves which had built the city to the glory of Tom stirred up unrest, and no man raised his arm against him. They foretold great events of which the people were ignorant and of which the temple seers were not informed. These were days of ominous calm, when the people waited for they knew not what. The presence of an unseen doom was felt. The hearts of men were stricken. Laughter was heard no more, and grief and wailing sounded throughout the land. Even the voices of children were stilled, and they did not play together, but stood silent. The slaves, and here the slaves are the Hebrew people, the Israelites, which again, I said that this is from the perspective of the Egyptians. The, even the voice of children were stilled, and they did not play together, but stood silent. The slaves became bold and insolent, and women were the possession of any man. Fear walked the land, and women became barren with terror. They could not conceive, and those with child aborted. All men closed up within themselves. The days of stillness were followed by a time when the noise of trumpeting and shrilling was heard in the heavens, and the people became as frightened beasts without a herdsman, as asses when lions prowl without their fold. The people spoke of the God of the slaves, and reckless men said, if we knew where this God were to be found, we would sacrifice to him. But the God of the slaves was not among them. He was not to be found within the swamplands or in the brick pits. His manifestation was in the heavens for all men to see, but they did not see with understanding, nor would any God listen, for all were dumb because of the hypocrisy of men. The dead were no longer sacred and were thrown into the waters. Those already entombed were neglected, and many became exposed. They lay unprotected against the hands of thieves. He who once toiled long in the sun, bearing the yoke himself, now possessed oxen. He who grew no grain now owned a storehouse full. He who once dwelt at ease among his children now thirsted for water. He who once sat in the sun with crumbs and dregs was now bloated with food. He reclined in the shade, his bowls overflowing. Cattle were left unattended to roam into strange pastures, and men ignored their marks and slew the beasts of their neighbors. No man owned anything. The public record were cast forth and destroyed, and no man knew who were slaves and who were masters. The people cried out to Pharaoh in their distress, but he stopped his ears and acted like a deaf man. There were those who spoke falsely before Pharaoh and had God's hostile towards the land, and therefore the people cried out for their blood to appease it. But it was not these strange priests who put strife in the land, but instead of peace, for one was even of the household of Pharaoh and walked among the people unhampered. Dust and smoke, clouds darkened the sky and colored the waters upon which they fell with a bloody hue. Plague was throughout the land. The river was bloody, and blood was everywhere. The water was vile, and men's stomachs shrank from drinking. Those who did drink from the river vomited it up, for it was polluted. The dust tore wounds in the skin of man and beast. In the glow of the destroyer, the earth was filled with redness. Vermin bred and filled the air and the face of the earth with loathsomeness. Wild beasts, afflicted with torments under the lashing sand and ashes, came out of their lairs in the wastelands and cave places and stalked the abodes of men. All the tame beasts whimpered, and the land was filled with the cries of sheep and the moans of cattle. Trees throughout the land were destroyed, and no herb or fruit was to be found. The face of the land was battered, devastated by a hail of stones, which smashed down all that stood in the path of the torrent. They swept down in hot showers, and strange flowing fire ran along the ground in their wake. The fish of the river died in the polluted waters. Worms, insects, and reptiles sprang up from the earth in huge numbers. Great gusts of wind brought swarms of locusts, which covered the sky. As the destroyer flung itself through the heavens, it blew great gusts of cinders across the face of the land. The gloom of a long night spread a dark mantle of blackness which extinguished every ray of light. None knew when it was day and when it was night. For the sun cast no shadow. The darkness was not the clean blackness of night, but a thick darkness which the breath of men was stopped in their throats. Men gasped in a hot cloud of vapor, which enveloped all the land and snuffed out all lamps and fires. Men were benumbed and lay moaning in their beds. None spoke to another or looked or took food, for they were overwhelmed. In despair, ships were sucked away from their moorings and destroyed in great whirlpools. It was a time of undoing. The earth turned over as clay spun upon a potter's wheel. The whole land was filled with uproar from the thunder of the destroyer overhead and the cry of the people. These, as the sound of moaning and lamentation, and every side the earth spewed up its dead. Corpses were cast up out of their resting places, and the embalmed were revealed to the sight of all men. Pregnant women miscarried, and the seed of men was stopped. The craftsman left his task undone. The potter abandoned his wheel, and the carpenter his tools, and they departed to dwell in the marshes. All crafts were neglected, and the slaves lured the craftsmen away. The dues of Pharaoh could not be collected, for there was neither wheat nor barley, goose nor fish. The rights of Pharaoh could not be enforced, for the fields of grain and the pastures were destroyed. The high born and the lowly prayed together that life might come to an end, and the turmoil, thundering, ceased to beat upon their ears. Terror was the companion of men by day, and horror their companion by night. Men lost their senses and became mad. They were distracted by frightfulness. On the great night of the destroyer's wrath, when its terror was at its height, there was a hail of rocks, and the earth heaved as pain rent her bowels. Gates, columns, and walls were consumed by fire, and the statues of gods were overthrown and broken. People fled outside their dwellings in fear and were slain by the hail. Those who took shelter from hail were swallowed up when the earth split open. The habitations of men collapsed upon those inside, and there was panic on every hand. But the slaves who lived in huts in the reedlands at the place of pits were spared. The land burnt like tinder. A man watched upon his rooftops, and the heavens hurled wrath upon him, and he died. The land writhed under the wrath of the destroyer, and groaned with the agony of Egypt. It shook itself, and the temples and palaces of the nobles were thrown down from their foundations. The highborn ones perished in the midst of the ruins, and all the strength of the land was stricken. Even the great one, the firstborn of Pharaoh, died with the highborn in the midst of the terror and falling stones. The children of princes were cast out into the streets, and those who were not cast out died within their abodes. There were 9 days of darkness and upheaval, while a tempest raged such as never had been known before. When it passed away, brother buried brother. Throughout the land, men rose up against those in authority and fled from the cities to dwell in tents in the outlands. Egypt lacked great men to deal with the times. The people were weak from fear and bestowed gold, silver, lapis lazuli, turquoise, and copper upon the slaves, and to their priests they gave chalices, urns, ornaments. Pharaoh alone remained calm and strong in the midst of confusion. These people turned to wickedness in their weakness and despair. Harlots walked through the streets unashamed. Women paraded their limbs and flaunted their womanly charms. Highborn women were in rags, and the virtuous were mocked. The slaves spared by the destroyer left the accursed land forthwith. Their multitude moved in the bloom of a half dawn under a mantle of fine, swirling gray ash, leaving the burnt fields and shattered cities behind them. Many Egyptians attached themselves to their host, for one who was great led them forth, a priest, a prince of the inner courtyard. We know this as Moses. Fire mounted up on high, and its burning left with the enemies of Egypt. It rose up from the ground as a fountain and hung as a curtain in the sky. In 7 days, by Renoir, the accursed ones journeyed to the waters. They crossed the heaving wilderness with the hills melted around them. Above, the skies were torn with lightning. They were sped by terror, but their feet became entangled in the land, and the wilderness shut them in. They knew not the way, for no sign was constant before them. They turned before Noshari and stopped at Shokoth, the place of quarries. They passed the waters of Maha and came by the valley of Pikaroth. Northward of Mara, they came up against the waters which blocked their way, and their hearts were in despair. The night was a night of fear and dread, for there was a high moaning above, and black winds from the underworld were loosed, and fire sprang up from the ground. The hearts of the slaves shrank within them, for they knew the wrath of Pharaoh followed them, and that there was no way of escape. They hurled abuse on those who led them. Strange rites were performed along the shore that night. The slaves disputed amongst themselves, and there was violence. Pharaoh had gathered his army and followed the slaves. After he departed, there were riots and disorders behind him, for the cities were plundered. The laws were cast out of the judgment halls and trampled underfoot in the streets. The storehouses and granaries were burst open and robbed. Roads were flooded, and none could pass along them. People lay dead on every side. The palace was split, and the prince and officials fled, so that none was left with authority to command. The list of numbers were destroyed, public places were overthrown, and households became confused and unknown. Pharaoh pressed on in sorrow, for behind him all was desolation and death. Before him were things he could not understand, and he was afraid. But he carried himself well and stood before his host with courage. He sought to bring back the slaves, for the people said their magic was greater than the magic of Egypt. Oh well, I didn't make it through, but I hope you enjoyed what I did share. God bless all. Good night.
Sacred Word Revealed comes to Atlanta, Georgia on March 27th through 29th, 2020. Purposed to reveal end times mysteries, to prepare the final generation, we must don the full armor of God. Featuring Zen Garcia, Gary Wayne, Stephen and Yana Ben-Nun, Dr. Stephen Pidgeon, Justin James Garcia, Dr. Joy Pugh, Rob Skiba, Laurel Austin, buy your tickets now at sacredwordrevealed.com.